Good afternoon. Let's do some business. Let's get right down to business here. We are doing it live, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons. We get right down to business with the news-driven hour right after Ben Shapiro and just before the 790 KABC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Mottek On Money, live on the air, 790 KABC, streaming live online worldwide at KBC.com. And your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, KBC.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Mixed start and a record-shattering start to the new big week on Wall Street. This is the week the Fed is expected to lower its benchmark short-term interest rate for the first time in 4 years, which will impact business and consumer loans. We'll get that decision on Wednesday, along with a full-blown news conference from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell and a statement on the economy. How much of a Fed cut is still an open question. Stocks ending mixed today as expectations for the Fed to deliver a half-point rate cut on Wednesday continue to grow. The Dow coming in for a closing gain of 228 points, putting it at 41,622. That is a record-shattering close for the day. In fact, the 27th record high close for the Dow so far this year. The S&P 500 ended the day higher by 7 points at 5,633. That's near its all-time high. The NASDAQ going in the opposite direction, pulling back 92, 17,592. Intel in the spotlight today. That stock has taken a big hit this year. Shares leading the Dow gainers today following the company's confirmation that it had secured an award worth up to $3 billion to make chips for the U.S. military. Intel stock rebounding today up nearly 6.5%. Closing up $1.25 to $20.91. Yep, Intel has really taken a hit and has been in the $20 range lately. Meanwhile, NVIDIA, the so-called Magnificent One, pulling back nearly 2% today, closing down $2.32 at $116 and change. We saw a rally in the Treasuries today, pushing yields to their lowest closing levels in a couple of years. In fact, the yield on the 10-year note down to 3.62%. That was the lowest seen since June 1st for the yield on the 10-year note, which impacts fixed-rate mortgage rates out there. Crude oil futures marking their highest settlement, meanwhile, in nearly 2 weeks, closing back above $70 a barrel, building on last week's gains despite the latest downbeat economic readings out of China, which has been depressing oil prices lately. Coming up later this hour, I'll be speaking live to Brad Close, the president of the National Federation of Independent Business. The NFIB is trying to make small business tax relief permanent. Also on the broader issues of taxes tonight and presidential contests and what's at stake, I'll be speaking live later this hour to Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. He'll be joining me live later this hour. But first, on today's record-shattering day for the Dow, your money, the markets, the economy, and the whole works. Joining us live now, top-ranked money manager Ken Winans, CEO and Chief Investment Officer at Winans Investments, which you can find at winansinvestments.com. Ken Winans, author of numerous books, including Investment Atlas 1 and 2, also Forbes magazine contributor. And now he has his own weekly show on 790 KBC. That show is Winning with Winans, which you can hear at 6 p.m. Monday evenings right here on your favorite station, 790 KBC. Ken Winans, thank you very much for coming to the line this afternoon.
Frank, my pleasure. And just so the audience knows, I'm actually back in the Lions Den, better known as Washington, D.C., part of a delegation from the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce, as we're just sifting through policies, tax policies, business policies, healthcare, all of it with the elected officials. And it is very interesting to be here during an election year because the crosswinds couldn't be stronger right now. And what you just rattled off about, small business tax cuts, just basically coming up with a framework that makes sense for everybody. And everybody is struggling with this, to be blunt. But let's talk about the markets. What you saw today, and I've been talking about it for quite some time, is that we are having a shifting in leadership. To have a day where Apple and NVIDIA are down and the Dow and the NASDAQ, the Dow and the S&P are hitting new highs, tells you there's other groups moving. The market cap weighted nature of the S&P 500 index is shifting. And in my opinion, the one group that came out, the stalwart winner today, were financials. They were miles ahead of pretty much any other group.
We're on the air live with money manager Ken Winans, and got the movement here on Intel, which finally came to life after taking a beating on that encouraging news that it's going to be getting contracts from the U.S. military. And also IBM, it looks like at or near an all-time high. Big Blue itself helping the Dow's cause today. And what about those two big tech names?
Well, there are two of the old. I mean, let's put it this way: they're the older tech companies, and I actually believe it's important to track not the flavor of the month in high tech, but look at what's consistently been in the game for decades. And you do have some life coming back into these old companies, partly because now you mentioned Intel, Frank. I mean, let's face it: the military's equipment is aged. They're trying to replenish things. We can argue the hows and whys of where we have gotten here with our equipment being basically used up. But the reality of it is we have to begin to replenish that equipment. And when you think about that, Intel makes basic circuitry. You need that in missiles. You need that in tanks. You need it in aircraft. You need these basic components, especially older machines. With that is why Intel's doing well. But as I said, I don't see it in tech right now. And in fact, Frank, I'll put myself on a limb. I don't think tech is going to lead the rally for the rest of the year. I think it is going to be other groups. I think, and I mentioned financials, you're having a shifting around. We can argue about valuations because, I think a lot of the tech stocks are very, very frothy from a valuation standpoint over the last 25 years. We can argue about that, but I do think that you find money moving around, and with the Fed's imminent decision on interest rates coming up on Wednesday, there's a lot of money moving around into these interest-sensitive plays, and that does not involve tech.
On the air live with money manager Ken Winans. It should be noted gold hit a record high today at $2,610.40 an ounce here at the moment, and silver also moving higher, well off its record high, but above $31 an ounce here. What do you think is going to happen on Wednesday? Will it be a quarter-point cut or a half-point cut? And already we're seeing the dollar weaken ahead of this, and that's probably one reason why we're seeing the precious metals rally, right?
Absolutely. And Frank, you're forgetting the other big rally today, frozen orange juice. People might be shocked where they're going to be paying for OJ here in a not distant future. You know what? I'm willing to, Frank, I'm going to put myself in the betting pool with everybody else on interest rates. I think it's going to be a quarter point. I honestly think the Fed is still concerned about the inflation numbers. Listen, it's a mixed bag economically, but I think it will be a quarter point. But it's more important to me is looking at the language. What is the language telling us? If the Fed is saying we're measured, we're moving in this direction, we're going to continue to move in this direction, that is far more powerful than the actual move they make on Wednesday. But no, I am in the quarter point camp. Hold me on it, my friend. I'll buy you a steak meal if I'm wrong, but that's where I think we're going.
All right, OJ back in the news today. Yep, orange juice futures. You're right, Ken, hitting record highs. Orange juice has never been more expensive, so that mimosa is getting a bit more expensive too. So we'll have to talk about that at some point. That Sunday brunch inflation is hitting pretty hard. Now we talked about analog gold here, good old fashioned gold. What about digital gold? I know you track the cryptos too. So what about Bitcoin here, which has seen some pretty wide moves lately? Right now, just below 58K.
You know what? As a technician, I'm trained to follow price moves, and the hows and whys are to be answered over a long weekend over a nice bottle of wine. The simple fact of the matter is that whatever was the momentum in crypto has largely died off. You're looking at it with Bitcoin and Ethereum especially. They've just gotten hammered over the last month. My suggestion is this. I think there are times you want to, as a trader, investor, to just, before you commit new money, take a moment of pause, let things sift themselves out. I think that's where we are right now with crypto. Crypto is trying to find its next direction. I'm still of the opinion that ever since Bitcoin announced the halving this summer, that sent just a tidal wave of skepticism into the crypto world because everybody was saying, what is going on here? How do you have something? Because they already had BitCash, and that was already kind of a funny byproduct of Bitcoin. But now you're talking about having something. So my point is simply this. I believe crypto has a place where people who are committed to it have it in their portfolio. but they need to view it in a broader sense, not just crypto. Look at it as stocks, bonds, commodities, and crypto. You need to and look at it that way. If you ask me to bet right now, I'm really keeping a close eye on Tether and some of the new stable coins they're coming out with. That is going to have a major effect on where people go from here. I just think that there's been so much money made. The rebound was so powerful, and people just don't want to give it back.
On there live with Money Manager Ken Wine is coming to us from Washington, traveling with a delegation from Las Vegas and the Chamber of Commerce. They're very interested to hear more about that, Ken, and tell us about your experience. You recently relocated from California to Las Vegas, and obviously California has a reputation of not being so business friendly, and just the opposite experience there in Vegas, as you've been telling us. Tell us more about your experience from moving from here to there, and what is the topic of discussion there today?
Actually, interesting. The Las Vegas Chamber is spending a lot of time, what we're calling it, employment migration. It is alive and well. A lot of people from the Southland are moving to Las Vegas, or at least their companies are moving there. The economics and the math is very compelling. I think that more than anything, when you just realize strategically, you're only talking about going east 3 hours. You're not talking about giving up your lifestyle. You're not talking about cutting family ties. When you think about people and companies that are picking up and moving to Texas or Florida from California, that's a lifestyle change. That's huge. Frank, I know you had to do it at one time. It's a big move, but 3 hours to make a economically strategic decision is not that big of a deal. And all I can tell you is that Las Vegas is opening all types of companies, financial services, crypto. I talked to one gentleman tonight, crypto security. They're looking at putting in major hubs, miners, crypto miners. They're relocating in Las Vegas. It's a very business-friendly place. But I have to tell you, and Frank, every now and then, as you know, I can be very a bit of a smartass. And I was really commenting today as I looked around the Capitol. There were nothing but gas-guzzling SUVs everywhere the eye could see, a whole fleet of them in front of the Capitol. And I simply asked people, I'm just curious, the Congress people who are in favor of the EVs and the Green New Deal, I just wonder what they think of this. And boy, did I get crickets when I asked that question. But as we do on ABC, we ask the tough questions. But it is amazing to see the bubble of Washington and the fact that they don't really connect with reality, which is what we live in.
On the air live with Ken Winans here in 790 KABC. And Ken, let me ask you this. We're going to be talking taxes here very shortly with the head of the National Federation of Independent Business, no less, as well as Grover Norquist, one of the nation's leading taxpayer advocates who created Americans for Tax Reform with former President Reagan back in those days. So obviously tax is a huge issue, and we're going to be hitting it big coming up here later this hour. But what is the talk there about the differences between the two candidates coming up here in the presidential election on the issue of taxes?
The thing, and it's actually kind of interesting, the lessons we learned in the 80s, the magnificent prosperity that we had when you cut taxes and you let the economy grow, the idea that you can actually grow yourself to higher tax revenues. To be honest with you, Frank, a lot of people don't have faith in that anymore. They think that was an aberration, that it won't happen again. They don't trust the growth model, if I had to put it very candidly. But at the same time, when you bring up to them that this endless raising of taxes or fees, as they like to call back here, I mean, the simple fact of it is, at some point, it does not work. And they're confused. If I had to be honest, what you hear back here, they really don't know where to go. I mean, one thing I was pleasantly surprised to see is that our elected officials are beginning to take the massive amount of debts we have seriously, and that you cannot continue spending money you do not have. I was thankfully surprised to hear that both sides of the aisle realize that the spending spree is over, the money is gone, we've got to get serious about this. But you're right, the policies could not be ever more different between raise tax on successful people, make them pay more, or believe in the overall growth model that is what has moved us before in the past. And that's what we're going to have to vote on.
On there live with Ken Winans. He's also, by the way, a big space enthusiast and a philanthropist. By the way, Any talk about this tremendous achievement in space done by SpaceX over the weekend and over the past several days with that spectacular, successful mission and splashdown off the coast of Florida? Any celebrations there?
Not here, but I have to tell you, I went on a tour of Arlington National Cemetery on Sunday. I decided to pay my respects, and I was blown away by how much on the tour they talked about. This astronaut is buried here. That astronaut is buried there. The astronauts play such an important role in our national identity. But and Frank, you and I are clearly very excited about the advancements to have a private citizen do, as we call an EVA, which stands for an extravehicular activity in space, who's not trained in that world. Excuse my tongue tiness here, but that's a big deal. And that is where space is going.
Absolutely, very exciting times, and for SpaceX here, still headquartered for the moment here in Southern California in Hawthorne. So our hat goes off to everyone at SpaceX today, including Jerry Shotwell and, of course, Elon Musk, who's still running the show there as well. And Ken, let me ask you a big question here that I don't want to take you by surprise here now, but with the Dow now at a record high, the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 near record highs. At this point, where are you putting money now and/or taking it off the table?
Okay, a couple of things. Number one, we've got a lot of news this week. We have economic news. We are beginning to have the forward guidance for the fourth quarter. There is one statistical thing that we all have to pay attention to, and that is the fall. Even in weird years, the market usually moves forward, especially November, December. So I think everybody needs to be getting their list together of what they want to buy. I will strongly urge the audience, you need to look at financials. If a lot of people are underweight, we've all done well with tech. Tech has been a fantastic run for 2 years. And I'm not saying dump your tech. What I'm talking about is rebalancing your portfolio. Look at financials, look at healthcare. I brought up on the last show talking about utilities. I mean, the utilities have been on a tear. I'm just suggesting it's time to record highs. It's time to rebalance the portfolios and do it before we have the fall run.
On there live with Ken Winans, and our audience should also know you're a philanthropist as well as a veteran too, Ken Winans, and big event coming up here at the end of this month, and I think you've heard about it because we've been making announcements about it here. You've been seeing probably billboards here in the Los Angeles area, and that is the Union Rescue Mission's Just Help One campaign. And in conjunction with that, we're having the Over the Edge event at the end of this month, where I will be rappelling off the top of the Universal Hilton Hotel, a 25-story hotel, along with other business folks and individuals. Church groups will be doing this too to raise money for Union Rescue Mission. Any chance you might be able to join us for our live broadcast from there and going over the edge?
Frank, the last time I rappelled, I was wearing a rucksack and an M16 with a helmet over a very large cliff. So I'll tell you what, buddy, I'll join you. But I will not be wearing the M16 again.
All right. That is fantastic, Ken. Thank you very much for that. And I know everyone at URM is elated to hear that today. So thank you very much. And thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon. We wish you a successful trip to Washington, D.C. And, of course, everyone should stay tuned this evening at 6 p.m. for Winning with Winans, the Ken Winans program here on 790 KABC. Ken Winans, thank you very much for taking the call this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank. You take care now. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Have a safe trip. Thank you very, very much. And let's go out to the freeways now here in 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. Good afternoon. Record-shattering day for the stock market. The Dow taking the spotlight today. The Dow wowed up 228 points to a record closing high of 41,622. IBM, Big Blue, in on today's rally, hitting record highs as well, up more than $2 at $217 and change. Taking a look at the S&P 500, it moved higher by 7 points at 5,633. The NASDAQ, though, lower by 92 points at 17,592. The yield in the 10-year note is back down to 3.62%. It's widely expected the Federal Reserve will be cutting its benchmark short-term interest rate on Wednesday when the Fed policymakers wrap up a two-day policy-setting meeting. The only question is, will it be a quarter point? Will it be a half-point cut? And that is the big question. So the market's trying to take all that in, and we'll be following it closely. And, of course, we'll have big coverage on Wednesday on all that. In the meantime, gold hitting a record high. It's widely expected as the Fed lowers rates for the first time in 4 years. The dollar will be taking a hit. And it's also probably another reason why we're seeing the Dow rally as the dollar moves lower. That makes our stuff less expensive overseas. So the price of gold, meanwhile, hitting a record high today, still above $2,600 at $2,610.40 an ounce here at the moment. Silver above $31 an ounce at $31.09. Taking a look at digital gold, a so-called digital gold, the cryptos, Bitcoin up 9 at 57,903, Ethereum up 11 at 2,284 as the wide moves in crypto continues. Doge at the moment at 10 cents. Among the winners today, Intel shares up 6.4%. NVIDIA down today by $2.32 at 116 and change. And now the latest news for you here in 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC, where we stand tall for small business, that is, the economic engine of the U.S. economy, small business. A huge part of the L.A. area economy, as we discussed recently at the L.A. Area Chamber of Commerce State of L.A. business event and other big business events lately where we've gathered with business leaders. And speaking of business leaders, joining us live now is Brad Close, the president of the National Federation of Independent Business, the nation's leading small business advocacy organization. As a chief executive there, Brad Close focuses on advancing advocacy efforts for small business in Washington and through the organization's unmatched 50-state network and grassroots operation. Brad Close, thank you very much for coming to the line this afternoon here in Southern California.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here this afternoon.
Wonderful to have you with us. You've been with the group for many years, and you were very much involved in the lobbying efforts that led to the creation of the small business deduction included as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which is very much in focus as we approach the November election. First of all, give us your view of what's happening on the small business scene and especially on the tax front.
Are facing the thing that most Americans are, high inflation, and has made things much harder, both for themselves and their employees. Cost of goods it's been harder for them to find more qualified workers right now too. The same thing you hear from lots of businesses. But one of the key things that is kind of the last few years of a
Looks like somebody's trying to jam our signal here, and we have to overcome a lot of adversities these days, and maybe we can get you back on a better line here, Brad Close, so we get that important message out. We'll try to reach back to you here in just a moment and continue the conversation with Brad Close, who's the president of the National Federation of Independent Business, NFIB, which is the nation's leading small business advocacy organization. Small business, of course, the economic engine of the U.S. economy and a huge part of the Los Angeles area economy. So we want to make sure we get a good signal to you and get that important message out. In the meantime, we do want to remind folks that it was a record-shattering day for the stock market today with the Dow in the spotlight, closing up 228 points, achieving its 27th record high close of the year at 41,622. The S&P 500 also ended the day higher by 7 points at 5,633, and the NASDAQ pulled back 92 points, settling at 17,592. The price of gold also kissing record highs today, still above 2,600. In fact, now at $2,610.40 an ounce. And silver, well off its all-time high, but also moving higher today at $31.09 an ounce. The yield on the 10-year note, which impacts fixed-rate mortgage rates, is pulled back to 3.62%. This ahead of the Federal Reserve's big meeting set for this week. They'll start it tomorrow and wrap it up on Wednesday, a two-day policy-setting meeting at which the Fed is widely expected to lower short-term interest rates for the first time in 4 years, which will impact business as well as consumer loans. The only question, it's widely expected that they will cut. Will it be a 0.25% cut or a 0.5% cut? That remains to be seen, and we'll get the answer at 11 a.m. here at Los Angeles time on Wednesday when that Fed statement comes out, the decision on interest rates, and then a full-blown news conference a half an hour later by Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. Among the gainers today, Intel shares led the Dow Jones Industrial Average. This is the stock that has really taken a big hit. Intel, of course, a tech bellwether, closing up 6.4% today, up $1.25 at $20.91. Intel confirms that it secured an award worth up to $3 billion to make computer chips for U.S. defense programs. As we heard from Money Manager Ken Winans a few moments ago, reminding us that Intel's been around a long time, and a lot of the stuff the military uses is older computers, and looks like Intel will be doing some upgrades for the U.S. defense programs, making new computer chips and upgrading some programs for the various systems. Meanwhile, NVIDIA, the so-called Magnificent One, pulling back nearly 2% today, down $2.32 at $116.78. Brad Close, let's continue our conversation now live here on Mottek on Money on 790 KABC. The president the National Federation of Independent Business. Brad Close, now that we found the fuse box and got power restored to you here, take it from the top and tell us your assessment of small business in America at the moment.
Yeah, right now small business is doing well, but struggling and fighting hard. I think like most Americans, inflation has really hit them hard. The last few years, their cost of goods has been higher, just like for most Americans. Their employees, it's gotten more harder on their employees. But the one thing that has really helped small business owners almost empower them through the last few years of a tougher economy and the tail end of COVID is this small business deduction, the 20% small business deduction that Congress created in 2017. And it helps bring small businesses closer to tax parity with their larger big business competitors.
All right, since you have a front row seat there in Washington, D.C., tell us about your lobbying efforts. Obviously, President Trump has vowed to continue that 2017 tax cut for small business, whereas the other side, Vice President Harris, basically vowing to raise taxes, right?
Unfortunately, yes. We have heard nothing from that campaign on this provision. And, you know, this is a provision that right now helps about 26 million small business owners across the country. They file it and take advantage of it. And in terms of money, it's not like tax breaks that big businesses get. It really lets them keep more of their hard-earned money in the business. And for some small businesses, could mean $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it enables them to do some really important things, like maybe offer a benefit for the first time, raise wages, buy some new equipment, even pay down debt.
And indeed, if it's not renewed, it's been calculated that essentially it would be the biggest tax increase in history, right?
For small businesses who benefit from this right now, and if you're listening as a small business owner and you don't know if you benefit, it's line 13 on your personal tax return. That will tell you what your benefit is. But if this isn't made permanent in a year and a half, it goes away, which will result in a massive tax increase on most small businesses.
All right. You, of course, track what's happening here in California. We've had many conversations with John Kabatek from the NFIB as well here, and has been keeping us well informed over the years. But California is unique, too, and onerous as far as taxes are concerned. What do you see happening here? What message are you getting out of California?
Well, I think our members are concerned. You know, California keeps wanting to go in an anti-business, anti-jobs way. And for small businesses, their margins are really thin. You know, small businesses can't absorb costs like large businesses can, and they can only raise prices so much before they lose their customers. So I think when you look at small businesses, the small business economy, it really is a foundation of what our country is and why it was built and where we are today. And so to make it so hard on small businesses to operate in such a great state like California is really troubling to all our members.
National Federation of Independent Business, of course, a membership organization. How can people connect with you and tell us what's the best way to do that?
Best way to do that on the small business deduction is to go to smallbusinessdeduction.com, and you can learn all about it. You can learn a little about NFIB, but more importantly, you'll be able.
Brad Close, thank you very much for joining us live here on Mottek on Money on 790 KABC. The president, the National Federation of Independent Business, live with us here, standing tall for small business here on 790 KABC. Mottek on Money continues here, 790 KABC. Stark contrast in tax policy between Republican presidential candidate and former President Donald Trump compared to the Democratic presidential candidate and current Vice President Kamala Harris. Whether the 2017 Trump tax cuts will be renewed, a huge issue for small businesses, as we just heard from the president of the National Federation of Independent Business. President Trump has vowed to renew those tax cuts if reelected, whereas at the other side, the Biden-Harris camp is basically vowed to raise taxes. Let's bring in the tax expert here, America's leading taxpayer advocate, Grover Norquist, the president of Americans for Tax Reform, who keeps close tabs on all of this. Grover Norquist, thank you very much for taking the call today.
Absolutely. Kamala Harris has been very frank at times about her plans to raise taxes. She wants to take the corporate rate on American businesses up higher than China, higher than any country in Europe, higher than Mexico, higher than Canada, which will, of course, mean Americans have to compete not on having lower taxes than other countries, but lower wages, which is not where you want to be. Add to that, it's going to be tough to get investment in the United States. She wants to take the capital gains tax. If somebody risks their life savings or some of their life savings and puts it in a new company, a new industry, a new product, and they get and the product succeeds and the value of the stock increases, there's a capital gain. The stock used to be $100, now it's $200. Wow, you had a very good investment. You invested in something other people didn't think could work, and it did. There's many times when you take those risks, they don't pan out. She wants to take the tax on that in a state like California to over about 50% or so, to take the capital gains tax higher than at any time since Jimmy Carter. Now, remember, Jimmy Carter's capital gains tax did so much damage to the economy that the Democrat House and the Democrat-controlled Senate voted against his wishes to cut it almost in half. They said, you're killing the economy with your capital gains tax. Kamala Harris wants to take the capital gains tax higher and more damaging than Jimmy Carter's. She also wants to institute a second death tax, which will be sure to tax all of the increase in your life savings that come from inflation, that are not real gains, but just inflationary gains that right now are not taxed terribly onerously. But in her future, she says they will. They will be taxed seriously. And that's one of two death taxes she wants. She's also called for a tax on carbon, a tax on energy. And in it, she said this is part of her plan. This is when she was, running for Senate, and then when she was running for president, and then as vice president, she kept saying she's she's also for destroying fracking industry, but taxing energy. And she says, under my plan, there'll be a carbon fee, she said in a CNN presidential town hall meeting. And whether asked about how that will affect consumers, because it would raise the prices, she says, well, we have to monitor whether it's going to be passed on to consumers. Of course it is. But I'm going to tell you, said Kamala, that that should never be the reason not to actually put a tax on, particularly a carbon tax. So she's for a carbon tax, even though she knows that it will hurt consumers. So it's not, I mean, there's some politicians you think they don't even think through what's going to happen. Oh, it'll just be free. She says, I know it'll hurt consumers. That's not a reason to oppose it. So those are her tax plans as she's put them forward. Oh, she also wants to take all of the tax cuts in the Trump tax cut, 2017 Republican tax cut. She wants to repeal all of that at Americans for Tax Reform, our website, atr.org, and at Kamalanomics.org. You can see her dozens of times giving that speech. On day one, I'm going to get rid of the whole Trump tax cut. That's the doubling of the per-child tax credit. That's the lower tax rate on small businesses that the fellow from the National Federation of Independent Businesses was just talking about. It's the reduction in our corporate income tax so we can be competitive with China. She wants to get rid of that. All of these tax cuts, it's expensive for new business investment, which makes it easier for companies to invest and make people more productive and therefore be able to get paid more. All of that she wants to take away as part of her tax increase. And of course, it will hit people of all income levels. So her boss or former partner, Biden, said, I'm only going to tax people who make more than $400,000 a year. Now with his inflation, that's $330,000 a year. And every year that gets closer and closer to your income level that they're going to go after without caring. And she's actually made it very clear that she's not going to be limited by that. When the IRS said we're going to hire $800 billion worth of people to go harass small businesses and lower income people. And the Republicans said, well, let's put a law in that says you won't increase the number of audits of low and middle income people, because that's what you say. The Democrats all said, oh, no, don't do that. We didn't mean it. We are going to audit middle income and low income people disproportionately.
Well, Grover, thank you very much for that comprehensive assessment of the stark contrast on tax policy between the two presidential candidates. And gosh, you reminded me back in 1980 when President Carter was defeated by Ronald Reagan. Of course, the economy and inflation were big issues. We had the Mariel boat lift back in 1980. We had the influx of refugees inundating South Florida back then. Iran, of course, also a big issue. And then fast forward 4 years later, President Reagan ran for re-election against Carter's Vice President Mondale, who in that famous debate, Mondale pledged to raise taxes, whereas President Reagan pledged to lower taxes, and President Reagan was re-elected in a landslide. The only state he didn't win was Mondale's home state of Minnesota. So interesting to draw these historical comparisons to what's happening now. Grover Norquist, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Wonderful to have you with us. That is Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang, and I'll be back with more at 4 tomorrow afternoon right here. Mottek On Money, 790 KBC.
The Rolling Stone Music Now podcast gets inside the biggest stories with Rolling Stone senior writer Brian Hyatt.
Guitarist Steve Howe of Yes on the making of Fragile, the birth of Prague.
I was trying to think about playing the guitar without any blues cliches. The golden rule on the Yes album is there would be no do-do-do-do-do-do.
And that was what ended up making it quote-unquote progressive, is if you ignore cliches, then you're headed forward.
That's right.
Rolling Stone Music Now, wherever you listen.